The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as I stared at the pink slip in my hands, the paper trembling slightly. Excessive absence. It read in sterile corporate font. 3 days. 3 days to bury my husband of 22 years. And they called it excessive. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Administrator Collins said, though his eyes never left his computer screen. "Policy is policy. Healthcare demands reliability." The irony wasn't lost on me. For 15 years, I'd been the most reliable person St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center had ever employed. Head nurse of the cardiac unit, the woman who'd never called in sick, who'd worked double shifts during flu seasons, who'd trained half the nursing staff currently keeping his hospital running. But 3 days to grieve Thomas, 3 days to say goodbye to the man who'd supported my nursing career since I was 23, apparently made me unreliable. "Jim will be taking over your duties temporarily," Collins continued, finally looking up with that practiced expression of bureaucratic sympathy. Jim Kramer, the assistant administrator who couldn't distinguish between a cardiac monitor and a coffee machine. "HR will process your final paperwork by week's end." I folded the termination letter and placed it in my purse. I understand. Because I did understand, perhaps better than Collins realized. I understood exactly what St. Catherine's was losing. 2 months earlier, Thomas had started complaining about chest pains. Being married to a cardiac nurse meant he couldn't hide symptoms from me, though he tried. The diagnosis came swift and merciless. Massive coronary artery disease, inoperable. "We had maybe 3 months, Dr. Patel said. We got 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, I worked every shift I could. Not because I needed the money, Thomas's insurance from the school district was comprehensive, but because my unit needed me. We were already short-staffed, running on a skeleton crew that I'd somehow managed to keep functional through careful scheduling and the kind of institutional knowledge that takes years to develop. The nursing staff trusted me. More importantly, they depended on me. I handled all the shift assignments, managed the delicate balance between our union requirements and hospital demands, and served as the primary liaison between the cardiac unit and administration. When budget cuts eliminated our unit secretary position last spring, I'd absorbed those duties too, maintaining the complex web of documentation and communication that kept 24 beds running smoothly. "The other nurses," I said to Collins. "Who's handling the scheduling rotations?" He waved dismissively. "Jim will figure it out. We'll probably bring in a temp agency coordinator." A temp coordinator. For a unit that required precise timing, intimate knowledge of each nurse's strengths and certifications, and the kind of institutional memory that prevented medication errors and protocol violations. I almost laughed. Walking through the cardiac unit for the last time, I was struck by how quiet everything seemed. The usual controlled chaos of monitors beeping, nurses consulting charts, and families hovering anxiously in doorways felt muted, as if the world had been wrapped in cotton. Several of my nurses looked up as I passed, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright anger. "Margaret." Lisa approached me near the medication station. At 28, she was one of our younger nurses but had shown exceptional promise. "Is it true? About the termination?" Word traveled fast in hospitals. "Yes, it's true. But you only took 3 days, she said, her voice rising. 3 days for a funeral. That's not excessive, that's human." I touched her shoulder gently. "Take care of each other," I said. "And take care of the patients. That's what matters." The next few days blurred together in a haze of paperwork and phone calls. Thomas's death had generated its own bureaucratic maze. Insurance claims, pension transfers, utility changes. But through it all, my phone kept ringing. First Lisa, then Marcus from nights, then Patricia from weekends. The scheduling system was falling apart. "They have me working 6/12s in a row," Marcus said during one call. "That violates our union contract. But Jim says it's temporary. Margaret, we need you back." But I wasn't coming back. Collins had made that clear when I'd asked about appeal procedures. "Budget constraints," he'd said. "We're restructuring anyway. Might be for the best." By the end of my first week of unemployment, I'd received 14 calls from my former colleagues. The picture they painted was increasingly grim. Jim had tried to create a new scheduling system using software that didn't account for certification requirements. Patricia, our most experienced ICU nurse, had been assigned to general cardiology shifts she wasn't qualified for. The union rep, Tony Martinez, was fielding grievances daily. It's a disaster, Patricia told me over coffee at the diner near the hospital. Yesterday, they had Monica working with post-surgical patients when she's only certified for general cardiac monitoring. One medication error and we could have lost someone. I stirred my coffee slowly, processing this information. St. Catherine's operated on razor-thin margins, like most regional hospitals. They couldn't afford mistakes, and they certainly couldn't afford the kind of systematic dysfunction that Jim's inexperience was creating. What about bringing in temporary staff? I asked. Patricia snorted. You know what agency nurses cost? 3 times our hourly rate, and they don't know our protocols or equipment. Plus, there's a shortage. Everyone's competing for the same pool of traveling nurses. It was then that I started to understand the magnitude of St. Catherine's mistake. They hadn't just fired their head nurse. They'd eliminated the institutional knowledge that kept their second-largest revenue-generating unit functional. The cardiac unit generated approximately $2.8 million annually for the hospital, representing nearly 30% of their patient revenue. Without proper staffing and management, that revenue stream was in serious jeopardy. 3 weeks after my termination, Dr. Jennifer Walsh called me at home. As chief of cardiology, she'd worked closely with me for over a decade. Margaret, I need to speak with you, she said. Not officially, you understand. But we have a problem. We met at her office during her lunch break. Jennifer looked exhausted, her usually immaculate appearance slightly frayed around the edges. We've had 2 medication errors this week, she said without preamble. Nothing fatal, thank God, but both could have been prevented with proper nursing oversight. The scheduling is chaos. Yesterday I had 2 nurses call in sick and nobody to cover because Jim had already assigned overtime to people who'd hit their union limits. She leaned forward. I've been getting pressure from above to keep quiet, but I want you to know, what they did to you was unconscionable. And it's hurting patients. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Not grief this time, but something else. Recognition, maybe. What are you asking me, Jennifer? I'm not asking anything, she said carefully. But I thought you should know that Memorial Hospital across town is opening a new cardiac unit. Dr. Patel mentioned they're looking for experienced nursing leadership. Memorial Hospital. St. Catherine's primary competitor, located just 15 minutes away. I'd heard rumors about their expansion plans but hadn't paid much attention while dealing with Thomas's illness and funeral arrangements. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I updated my resume. The process was surreal. Documenting accomplishments I'd taken for granted, quantifying improvements that had become second nature. Reduced medication errors by 43% through implementation of new verification protocols. Improved patient satisfaction scores from 3.2 to 4.7 over 5 years. Maintained unit staffing at 96% capacity despite industry-wide nursing shortage. The numbers painted a clear picture of value that Collins had apparently never bothered to calculate. I submitted my application to Memorial on a Thursday. By Monday, I had an interview scheduled with Dr. Amanda Foster, their new chief of cardiology. By Wednesday, I had a job offer that included a 15% salary increase and full authority over nursing staff and scheduling. But before I accepted, I needed to understand something. I called Tony Martinez, the union representative. Tony, it's Margaret. I have a hypothetical question about union contracts and staffing transitions. Margaret, how are you holding up? And nothing's hypothetical with you. What do you need to know? If an entire nursing unit were to resign simultaneously, what would be the contractual implications for the hospital? There was a long pause. Well, hypothetically, if more than 50% of a unit gave notice during the same period, the hospital would be required to maintain patient safety standards using agency staff or risk regulatory sanctions. The costs would be enormous. We're talking potentially hundreds of thousands in overtime and agency fees, not to mention possible fines from the state health department if patient care standards weren't maintained. And if those nurses had found positions elsewhere? Then they'd be free to leave, assuming they gave proper notice. 2 weeks is standard, but for specialized units like cardiac, most places would want more transition time. I thanked Tony and hung up. Then I called Dr. Foster at Memorial. Dr. Foster, I'm interested in your offer, but I have a question. If I were to bring a team with me, experienced nurses who know my management style, would Memorial be interested? How many nurses are we talking about? I did quick mental math. Lisa, Marcus, Patricia, Monica, and at least 6 others had expressed frustration with current conditions. Possibly 8 to 10. All certified, all experienced in cardiac care. There was excitement in her voice. Margaret, that would be incredible. We're struggling to find qualified cardiac nurses. If you could bring a complete team, we'd be operational months ahead of schedule. Over the next week, I had careful conversations with my former colleagues. I didn't recruit anyone. That would have been unethical and potentially illegal. Instead, I simply let them know about opportunities at Memorial and my own plans. They want to hire you as Director of Cardiac Nursing? Lisa asked when we met for coffee. That's amazing, Margaret. You deserve recognition after what St. Catherine's did to you. It's a good opportunity, I agreed. Memorial is offering competitive salaries and they seem committed to proper staffing levels. Proper staffing, Patricia said bitterly. Remember what that was like? When we actually had enough people to do our job safely. The following Monday, I accepted Memorial's offer. Tuesday, I submitted my 2 weeks' notice to St. Catherine's, a professional courtesy, even though I'd already been terminated. Wednesday, Lisa submitted her resignation. Thursday, Marcus and Patricia followed suit. By Friday, 8 of the 12 cardiac unit nurses had given notice. By the following Tuesday, it was 10. Collins called me personally that Wednesday. Margaret, I understand you're recruiting our nurses, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I'm not recruiting anyone, Mr. Collins. I accepted a position at Memorial. Some of my former colleagues have chosen to explore opportunities there as well. This is highly unprofessional. After everything St. Catherine's has done for you. Mr. Collins, I interrupted, my voice steady. St. Catherine's terminated me for taking 3 days to bury my husband. I don't believe we need to discuss professional courtesy. He hung up without another word. The situation at St. Catherine's deteriorated rapidly. With 10 experienced nurses gone, they were forced to rely heavily on agency staff and overtime shifts. The cardiac unit, which had operated smoothly under my management for years, was suddenly requiring constant administrative attention. Dr. Walsh called me 2 weeks later. Margaret, I thought you should know. We've had to divert 3 cardiac cases to other hospitals this week because we couldn't guarantee proper nursing coverage. Administration is panicking. I'm sorry to hear that, Jennifer. Patient safety should always be the priority. There's more, she said. The State Health Department is conducting an inspection next month. With all the staffing changes and incident reports, they're concerned about our cardiac program's compliance status. I closed my eyes, feeling no satisfaction in this news. State inspections could result in sanctions that would effectively shut down a unit. More importantly, patients were being affected. Jennifer, you know I want the best for St. Catherine's patients. If you need help with documentation or transition planning, that's kind of you, but Collins has made it clear that any contact with you is grounds for disciplinary action. He's convinced you orchestrated this whole thing as revenge. Revenge. As if I'd somehow caused my husband's death to create an excuse for absence, knowing Collins would fire me, predicting that my termination would lead to systematic unit failure. The paranoia was almost impressive in its scope. Meanwhile, Memorial's cardiac unit was coming together beautifully. My former colleagues had transitioned smoothly, bringing their expertise and familiarity with my management style. We established protocols based on what had worked at St. Catherine's, but improved with Memorial's better resources and administrative support. Lisa thrived in her new role as assistant charge nurse. Marcus, working in an environment that respected his union rights, became one of our most reliable shift leaders. Patricia, with proper support and recognition, demonstrated why she'd been invaluable at St. Catherine's. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were providing better patient care than ever before, just not at the hospital that had deemed my dedication insufficient. 2 months after the mass exodus, Tony Martinez called with an update on St. Catherine's situation. It's not good, Margaret. They're burning through their nursing budget at triple the normal rate. Agency nurses are costing them $85 per hour versus the $32 they were paying staff nurses. Plus overtime penalties, recruitment costs, and now potential regulatory fines. How are the patients? That's the worst part. 3 serious incidents in 6 weeks, all related to staffing issues. No fatalities, thank God. But the liability insurance company is asking serious questions. Collins is scrambling to hire permanent staff, but word has gotten out about working conditions there. I felt genuinely sad hearing this. St. Catherine's had been my professional home for 15 years. Despite Collins's short-sightedness, there were good people there who cared about patients. Tony, what would it take to stabilize their situation? Honestly? They need experienced cardiac nursing leadership and a completely new approach to staff management. But at this point, they'd probably need to offer significant incentives to attract quality candidates. Their reputation in the nursing community is pretty damaged. 3 months after my termination, Memorial's cardiac unit officially opened. Our patient satisfaction scores were exceptional, our outcomes were excellent, and we were already operating at capacity. Dr. Foster had been promoted to Chief Medical Officer partly based on the success of our unit launch. More importantly, we were saving lives. Patients who might have been diverted or received suboptimal care were getting the cardiac treatment they needed, when they needed it. The local newspaper ran a feature story about Memorial's expansion, highlighting our nursing team's expertise and the seamless transition we'd managed. I was quoted briefly, emphasizing our commitment to patient care and professional development. Collins, meanwhile, was facing questions from St. Catherine's Board of Directors about the cardiac unit's performance and budget overruns. According to Jennifer, who'd become increasingly forthright about hospital politics, there was talk of administrative restructuring. 6 months after my termination, I received an unexpected call. It was Robert Patterson, chairman of St. Catherine's Board of Directors. Ms. Stone, I hope you don't mind the direct contact. I wanted to discuss a possible opportunity. I'm listening, Mr. Patterson. We're restructuring our administrative team, and we're looking for someone to oversee nursing operations across all units. It would be a significant position, Director of Nursing Services with full authority over staffing, scheduling, and protocols. The compensation would be substantially above your previous level. I was quiet for a moment, processing this offer. They wanted me back, in a role with more authority and better pay than I'd ever had. It was vindication of a sort. Mr. Patterson, I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite happy at Memorial. We've built something excellent here. I understand your reluctance, given how things ended. I want you to know that Collins is no longer with the organization. The board felt a change in leadership was necessary. So Collins had been removed. Part of me felt satisfied by this news, though I tried to suppress that reaction. The offer is generous, I said, but my commitment is to Memorial and the team we've built here. These nurses took a risk following me, and I won't abandon them for a better offer. I respect that, Ms. Stone. But if you change your mind, please know that St. Catherine's recognizes the mistake we made. You were an invaluable asset, and we should have treated you as such. After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at Memorial's bustling cardiac unit. Lisa was training a new nurse, Patricia was updating patient charts with her characteristic precision, and Marcus was coordinating with physicians on treatment plans. This was what we'd built together, a place where professional expertise was valued, where proper protocols were followed, and where patient care came first. It hadn't happened through revenge or manipulation, but through competence, integrity, and mutual respect. A year later, Memorial's cardiac program had become the regional standard for excellence. We'd expanded to include a cardiac rehabilitation unit and were planning a specialized stroke center. Several nurses from other hospitals had requested transfers to join our team. St. Catherine's cardiac unit, meanwhile, had stabilized under new leadership, though it took them nearly 18 months and significant financial investment to rebuild their nursing staff and reputation. They never regained their previous market position in cardiac care. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, I visited his grave with flowers and a small photo of our team at Memorial. I told him about the work we were doing, about the patients we'd helped, about the professional family we'd created. You always said the best revenge was success, I said to his headstone. I think you'd be proud of what we've accomplished. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and I felt a familiar peace. Not the peace of vindication or triumph over enemies, but the deeper satisfaction that comes from living your values under pressure and finding that they hold. Collins had seen my absence at my husband's funeral as excessive. But he'd failed to calculate the true cost of losing someone who'd spent 15 years building something irreplaceable. Institutional knowledge isn't just about procedures and protocols. It's about relationships, trust, and the kind of leadership that holds teams together during difficult times. St. Catherine's had thrown away something valuable for the sake of bureaucratic policy. By the time they realized their mistake, we'd rebuilt that value somewhere else, somewhere that appreciated what we brought to the table. I'd learned that the best revenge isn't calculated at all. It's simply living well, working with integrity, and building something better than what you lost. Success, as Thomas used to say, speaks for itself. As I walked back to my car, I thought about Monday's schedule. We had a complex surgical case coming in, a new nurse starting orientation, and a quality improvement meeting with administration. Memorial's leadership would listen to our recommendations, implement our suggestions, and support our professional judgment. It was, I reflected, exactly the kind of Monday I'd always wanted to have. The hospital world is small, and reputations matter more than many administrators realize. Word spreads about organizations that value their staff and those that don't. Nurses talk to each other, share experiences, and make career decisions based on more than just salary. St. Catherine's had taught me that loyalty is a two-way street, that dedication must be reciprocated to have meaning. Memorial had shown me that when institutions align with professional values, remarkable things become possible. Thomas would have understood the lesson perfectly. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't fighting back, but building something so much better that the contrast speaks for itself.